It's a way of the Mr. Quickie, oh yeah. Among the most powerful arguments suggesting that the tribal war God of Abraham does not exist is the argument from divine hiddenness. There's the more casual version of the argument where we simply recognize that God's existence is non-obvious, that he is both silent and absent in our lives in any direct way, and that such a thing should not be if God truly loves us. Then there is the more formal version, originally pioneered by J.L. Shellenberg, where the argument regarding a perfectly loving God is formulated in a syllogism, which in its most basic form goes like this. Premise 1. If a perfectly loving God exists, non-resistant, reasonable non-belief does not occur. Premise 2. Non-resistant, reasonable non-belief does occur. Conclusion: no perfectly loving God exists. Of course, this assumes that a perfectly loving God would create a place for sentient beings which is filled with evil and suffering, and then place those sentient beings into that environment without their consent in the first place. But let's look past all that and just focus elsewhere for a moment. Theists will often ask people like myself, what would it take to convince you of God's existence? I have my own answer to that question, but my friend Matt Dillahunty has an answer I prefer for the purposes of this video. He says that he doesn't know what would convince him, but that God does and could make that happen at any moment. So since God hasn't convinced him yet, Matt concludes that either God doesn't care, that Matt's belief is unimportant, or that God simply doesn't exist. I have a group of Christian friends I see every Sunday here down at the beach. Every now and then they'll make another attempt to convert me. And all I can say is, I just don't believe it. I really don't. Nor can I make myself believe it. Either we're convinced of something and we believe it to be true, or we're not and we don't. And in the case of God's existence, lying just won't do, because God would know that I'm lying. This is one of the many problems with our salvation being dependent on what we believe. You don't have a choice to believe something. Either you do or you don't. And yet, according to some Christians, this is how we're going to be judged. By this very same God who clearly plays favorites. God has convinced some of us while leaving others of us to wallow in our unbelief, with an ultimately dire fate coming at us like a Mack truck. God's either revealing himself to some in a way that they find convincing, or he's created certain people in such a way that the evidence I find lacking is compelling to them. But it's not just about salvation in it. Christians are constantly talking about the benefits of belief in the here and now. I've made my own response video to a PragerU video on just this topic. So, having not been convinced, having whatever evidence I would find compelling withheld from me by God, means that I'm missing out on all of those amazing benefits as well, right here, right now. Right, Braxton?
If God exists as the very locus of truth, goodness, and beauty, then orienting your life worshipfully around the source of truth, goodness, and beauty is the best thing for mankind. It's good for you to orient your life around the locus of all truth, goodness, and beauty.
Obviously, there's nothing about God revealing himself in order to convince us which in any way violates our free will or natural law or whatever. He clearly does that for some, and has done so all throughout history. Meaning, if a perfectly loving God does exist, his failure to convince anyone of his existence is immoral, both in terms of our salvation and in terms of the goodness we experience here and now. Once again, I'm me. Thanks for watching.